The wind howled through the valley, carrying with it the smell of gunpowder and damp earth. Rows of nameless graves stretched beyond the fog, each marked only by rusted helmets and crooked wooden crosses. There were no flags here, no trumpets, no medals, only silence, the kind of silence that screams louder than war itself. These were the soldiers the world had chosen to forget, buried in soil that remembered every scream, every whisper, every broken promise. For decades no one spoke of them, not the generals who sent them, not the governments that disowned them, and not even the families who waited by candlelight for letters that never came. Their war was erased from textbooks, their names struck from records, their sacrifice traded for political amnesia. But history has a cruel habit. It never truly dies. It waits, buried beneath the lies until someone dares to uncover it. Before you continue this story, make sure to like and subscribe, because what you're about to hear isn't just a story. It's a heartbeat of those who never returned home, but never stopped fighting. They called it the Balkan conflict, though no official record ever used that name. It began in the early months of 1952, hidden beneath the shadow of the Cold War. The world was already divided, East versus West, ideology versus survival, but in a small, mountainous region between two collapsing empires. Another war brewed. It was never declared. It had no anthem, no marching drums, no broadcast speeches, only whispers. Only orders passed through coded telegrams and sleepless eyes. At first, it was a containment operation. That's what the memo said. A minor stabilization effort in a territory no one could find on a map. The soldiers sent there believed they were defending freedom, protecting innocence, upholding peace, all the usual words that taste noble but rot with time. Most of them were barely 20. Farmers' sons, factory workers, dreamers. They left behind mothers who prayed, lovers who waited, and towns that soon forgot their names. They marched into the mountains under grey skies, boots sinking in wet snow. The terrain was merciless, jagged peaks, narrow passes, forests that swallowed sound. Locals spoke of ancient ruins in those hills, of villages that disappeared without explanation. But the soldiers had no time for myths. They had maps to follow, coordinates to reach, and orders to obey. In the first few weeks, nothing happened. No enemy, no movement, just silence and fog. Patrols came back empty, radio static filled the nights, and command posts grew restless. Then one night it began. A scout team vanished. No distress call, no trace. By morning, search units found their campsite. Rifles still in place, fire still burning, and plates of untouched rations beside a blood trail that led into the woods. That was the first sign, the first fracture in their reality. But the higher-ups dismissed it. Fog of war, they said. Mountain ambush. They sent more men into the mist, and more never came back. The soldiers soon realized they weren't fighting an enemy they could see. It wasn't a nation or an army. It was shadows in the trees, whispers on the wind, traps left in places no human should have known. Locals called them the remnants, survivors of an old rebellion crushed years before, men who'd gone feral, building their lives in caves and ruins. But no one ever saw them clearly. Not alive, at least. By the third month, morale had decayed. Letters stopped coming. Supplies ran thin. And the orders from command grew vague, almost careless. Hold position. Reinforcements delayed. Reinforcements that never arrived. Entire companies were cut off from the world. Radio lines dead, surrounded by a landscape that no longer felt real. One soldier, Private Mason Hale, kept a journal. His handwriting, found decades later in a rusted ammo box, became one of the only surviving accounts of what truly happened in those mountains. In one entry dated April 9, 1952, he wrote, "We heard singing tonight. Women's voices, faint through the fog, but when we followed the sound there was nothing. Just old graves and a burned church. Captain says it's the wind, but I swear the wind was singing our names." Weeks turned into months. Hunger and fear gnawed at them harder than bullets ever could. They fought unseen enemies, shadows that struck from nowhere and vanished into the snow. Their uniforms shredded, their boots rotted, and the mountains swallowed their sanity. And yet reports of victory still reached the capital. Command painted a picture of progress. Operation successful. Area stabilized, but it was a lie. The soldiers were ghosts before they even died. In August, a single surviving platoon reached a village marked Al-Nora on their outdated maps. Smoke rose from chimneys, and the sound of distant bells echoed faintly. Relief washed over them. Civilization at last. But when they entered, the streets were empty. No footsteps, no laughter. Only walls carved with strange symbols and photographs nailed to doors, faces of men in uniform, smiling. Their faces. That night a storm hit. Lightning ripped across the valley, illuminating the mountains like an open wound. Mason wrote again, his final words before the journal ended abruptly. "We found a mirror in the church basement, cracked, old. But when I looked in it, I saw myself in a different uniform, older, wounded, buried. There's something here that doesn't want to be remembered." The storm buried the valley in snow. By winter's end, not a single soldier remained. Command officially terminated the operation. The records were sealed, labeled classified indeterminate outcome, and the world moved on. But silence has weight. In 1971, nearly 20 years later, an old farmer unearthed a mass grave while digging near the same mountain pass. Over 100 skeletons, all wearing insignias of a battalion that, according to the military archives, had never existed. No one claimed the bodies. The newspapers ran the story for a day, and then nothing. Pulled by unseen hands, erased from print, as if the dead demanded their anonymity. There are rumors that those who visited the site heard strange things. Whispers in foreign tongues. Footsteps at night. The valley became off-limits, fenced by barbed wire and declared a restricted geological hazard zone. But the locals knew the truth. They said the mountain was cursed, not because of spirits, but because it carried the guilt of men who were abandoned. Decades later, a journalist named Elena Markovic stumbled upon Mason's journal in an antique market in Belgrade. The pages were brittle, water-stained, but the handwriting was clear. The seller claimed it was found in a sealed crate near the old Alnora ruins. Helena became obsessed. She started tracing every lead, old military records, missing personnel lists, and forgotten dispatches. What she found was disturbing. Multiple nations had quietly sent troops to that region, under no official alliance. It wasn't a war of defense or conquest, it was a test. A covert experiment in psychological warfare. As Eleanor dug deeper, she uncovered references to Project Eclipse, a classified directive buried in Cold War intelligence archives. It mentioned environmental manipulation, perception warfare, and field-based isolation conditioning. Whatever happened in those mountains, it wasn't just war. It was something else, a deliberate erasure of human memory itself. By 1980, Elena vanished. Her apartment was found abandoned, notes scattered, typewriter still loaded with a half-finished sentence. They didn't die for their country. They died because someone needed them to be forgotten. The mountain still stands, cold, silent, unmarked on modern maps. Satellite images show shifting terrain, new ridges where old valleys once were, like the earth itself is trying to hide its own wounds. And sometimes, during heavy fog, travelers report hearing faint echoes of marching boots fading into the distance. They say the forgotten never truly die. They wait, waiting for a world brave enough to remember them. The rain had not stopped for days. Belgrade's old streets glistened under the dull glow of yellow lamps, puddles reflecting the skeletal branches of leafless trees. Inside a narrow apartment on Gavrilo Street, the sound of a typewriter echoed softly against the walls, rhythmic, desperate, like the heartbeat of obsession. Elena Markovic hadn't slept in 3 nights. Her desk was covered in maps, old photographs, and pages torn from declassified reports. At the center of it all lay the battered leather journal, the one belonging to Private Mason Hale. She traced her finger over the final line again and again. They didn't die for their country. They died because someone needed them to be forgotten. The words refused to leave her mind. In her years as a war correspondent, she had seen blood, lies, and politics twisted into tragedy, but nothing like this. There was no official record of the Balkan conflict. No memorials, no veterans. It was as if the war had never existed. Yet Hale's journal was real, his handwriting authenticated by forensic experts. The paper traced to U.S. military stock from the 1950s. Someone had gone to extraordinary lengths to bury the truth, and Elena intended to dig it out, even if it consumed her. Her investigation began with the archives, dusty, neglected and guarded by bureaucracy thicker than concrete. She bribed clerks, forged requests, slipped into restricted reading rooms after hours. Most of the files were redacted, pages blacked out like a censor's confession. But hidden among the meaningless reports, she found fragments, coordinates, weather logs, coded dispatches, and something else, references to Operation Eclipse. The more she uncovered, the more dangerous it became. One night, returning home, she found her apartment door slightly ajar. Nothing was missing, but everything had been moved. The kind of subtle intrusion that says, "We see you." She burned the papers she couldn't hide, stashed the rest in a hollow behind her wardrobe, and told no one. But paranoia couldn't stop her curiosity. She traced the coordinates mentioned in the dispatches. They pointed to a small mountainous region between the old Yugoslav and Austrian borders, a no-man's land now fenced off as an environmental exclusion zone. Locals called it the Hollow Ridge. Officially, it was uninhabitable due to old mines and unstable terrain, but Elena had seen satellite photos. There were no mines, just patterns on the ground, strange circular clearings perfectly symmetrical, like scars left by something not natural. She packed a small camera, a recorder, and Mason's journal. 2 days later, she was on a bus heading north, the grey city fading behind her as the countryside unfolded, abandoned farms, skeletal barns, rivers swollen from the endless rain. The passengers were silent, except for an old man humming an old soldier's tune. When Elena asked him if he knew the song, he smiled sadly. "It was from the war," he said. "Which war?" she asked. The man stared out the window for a long time before answering. "The one we're not supposed to remember." By the third day, the bus dropped her in a fog-drowned town called Rudna, little more than a handful of houses, a broken church, and a single inn. The air smelled of pine and wet ash. The innkeeper, a woman in her 60s, eyed Elena's press badge and foreign accent with suspicion. "No visitors this time of year," she said flatly. "The ridge is dangerous, avalanches." "I'm here for research," Elena replied, forcing a polite smile. "History." The woman's expression didn't change. But later that night, as Elena sat by the fire with her notes, the innkeeper approached quietly and placed a folded paper on the table. "You're looking for the dead," she whispered. "Be careful. They remember more than we do." Then she left. Inside the folded paper was a crude map, hand-drawn with a line leading from the village to a cross marked deep in the forest. Beneath it 2 words, Alnora Church, the same name from Mason's journal. She set out at dawn. The forest was thick, the air heavy with mist. Each step sank into the soft, silent earth. After hours of walking, the trees parted to reveal the ruins of a church, its steeple broken, its stones devoured by moss. The air felt colder here, unnaturally still. Crows perched on the rafters, silent as statues. Inside, the pews were gone. The altar collapsed, and shards of colored glass lay like frozen blood on the floor. She found the basement entrance behind a half-collapsed arch. The wooden stairs groaned under her weight. Her flashlight cut through the dark, revealing walls covered in carvings, names scratched hastily as if by trembling hands. Some were English, some Cyrillic, dozens of them. She recognized one instantly, Emsher Hale. At the far end, something gleamed. A mirror cracked, its frame burned, the same mirror Mason had written about. Her reflection flickered in the fractured glass, bending with the cracks, one face splitting into many. She reached out, her fingers brushing the surface, and for a brief second the light changed. The basement wasn't a ruin anymore. The walls were whole, candles flickered, and faint voices echoed. Men speaking softly, loading rifles, laughing nervously. Soldiers, the same uniforms described in the journal. One turned, his eyes meeting hers through the mirror. And then darkness. Elena stumbled back, her flashlight flickering. The basement was empty again. The reflection showed only her pale, shaking face. She ran. When she returned to the village, the innkeeper was waiting by the door, eyes full of something between fear and pity. "You went there," she said quietly. "What happened to them?" Eleanor demanded. The woman hesitated, then sat by the fire, speaking in a low, trembling voice. "They came here during the old winter, soldiers, lost, starving. They asked for food, for warmth. We gave them shelter. But they weren't the first. Others came before, but same uniforms, same faces. The mountain keeps bringing them back. Eleanor froze. You mean... The woman shook her head. I mean they never left. The ridge doesn't let them go. Not them, not their memories. We stopped going there long ago. Too many disappear. The story sounded insane, but something about it rang true. The valley had an atmosphere of suspended time, as if history had folded in on itself. And if Project Eclipse was real, maybe it wasn't just psychological warfare. Maybe it was something that tampered with perception itself. That night, Elena recorded her findings into a tape. Her voice trembled as she spoke. I've seen it. I've seen what Mason described. The mirror, the soldiers. The air here feels thick, like walking through memory. Maybe that's what they were experimenting with. A way to erase history by bending the human mind itself. But it didn't just erase them. It trapped them. As the tape hissed, faintly in the background, another sound could be heard. Faint, rhythmic, marching. Days later, she received a letter slipped under her door. No name, no return address. Just a message typed on yellowing paper. Stop looking. Project Eclipse was never shut down. They're watching. Elena didn't stop. She took a train to Vienna to meet a retired intelligence officer known only as Colonel Rayner, rumored to have worked on experimental Cold War projects in the 1950s. The man was frail, wrapped in blankets, living in a dim apartment that smelled of medicine and dust. At first, he refused to speak. But when she mentioned the Balkan conflict, he froze. You shouldn't know that name, he whispered. I just want the truth. He looked at her for a long time, then reached into an old trunk and pulled out a folder marked Eclipse Phase 3. Inside were faded photographs, soldiers in gas masks, metallic towers emitting strange light, and aerial shots of geometric patterns carved into mountain valleys. It wasn't a war, he said finally. It was an experiment. The idea was simple. Control memory, control history. We built a field generator meant to distort human perception, erase entire events from collective awareness. They said it would be bloodless warfare, a way to rewrite reality. But it failed. The field became unstable. It didn't just erase memory, it fractured it. The men inside the test zone, they didn't die, not in the normal sense. They were trapped in overlapping timelines, reliving the same weeks over and over, echoes of themselves. Elena felt her chest tighten. So they're still there. Rayner's eyes glistened. They are, and so are we. Every time someone remembers them, the field pulses again. That's why they buried it. The less people know, the safer it stays. He leaned closer, his voice dropping to a whisper. You can't unlearn this, Miss Markovich. Once you know, you become part of it. Before she could respond, he coughed violently, his hand clutching his chest. Minutes later, he was dead. A sudden heart failure, too convenient to be coincidence. Elena fled the apartment, the folder clutched to her chest. That night, as she waited for the midnight train, she looked out the station window and saw them. Dozens of soldiers standing across the platform, uniforms faded, faces pale and hollow. One of them raised a hand as if in salute. Then the lights flickered and they were gone. Weeks later, her editor received a final package in the mail, a reel of tape, a stack of photographs, and a single page that read, If you hear marching in the fog, it means they remember you. The tapes were analyzed. Her voice narrated the entire journey, calm and haunted, describing everything, the journal, the ruins, Rayner's confession. But at the end of the last tape, her voice changed, slower, echoing. I can see them now. They're not gone. They're waiting. Not for rescue, for recognition, then silence. Elena Markovich was never found. Her apartment was sealed. Her name quietly removed from press directories. Years later, a new housing block was built where her office once stood. Beneath its foundations, workers found an old typewriter still loaded with a single unfinished page. History doesn't fade when we stop telling it. It fades when we choose to forget. Some nights when the fog rolls through the valley, radios pick up faint transmissions, voices calling names from long ago, the same names carved into the church walls. And somewhere deep within the hollow ridge, the sound of boots still echoes, marching endlessly. Through the fog of a war no one wanted to remember. The footage opens with static, A flicker of distorted sound, a flash of light, and the soft, rhythmic hiss of an old tape machine. A voice speaks faintly through the noise. If you hear marching in the fog, it means they remember you. Then silence. The tape clicks, rewinds itself and stops. It's the year 2024. The world has changed. Or at least, it looks that way. Wars now live inside data streams, not trenches. Memory is digital, curated, polished, rewritten every day by screens that decide what should matter. But truth has a strange endurance. It hides in fragments, waiting for someone stubborn enough to listen. That someone was Daniel Rowe, a 32-year-old historian and digital archivist working for the European Memory Preservation Institute in Vienna. Daniel specialized in lost conflicts, wars erased by censorship or propaganda. It wasn't glamorous work, but it mattered to him. His grandfather had been a soldier in one such forgotten operation, though the family never spoke of it. One rainy afternoon, while sorting through unmarked boxes donated from a defunct Cold War records facility, Daniel found a dusty metal reel labeled E.M. Arch Alnora. The handwriting was faint but recognizable, the same as the missing journalist Elena Markovich. Alongside the reel was a folder marked Eclipse, Phase 4, terminated 1972. The files were heavily redacted, entire paragraphs blacked out. But the dates, 1952, 1971, 1980, aligned perfectly with Elena's research. Daniel didn't believe in coincidences. He restored the tape, fed it into an old player, and pressed play. A woman's voice, trembling, exhausted but clear. They're not gone. They're waiting, not for rescue, for recognition. Her final words exactly as transcribed in the archived report of her disappearance. But there was more and muffled footsteps than a whisper. Male, distant, indistinct. Daniel slowed the recording, cleaned the sound. The voice repeated something over and over. Phase 5 is already active. For the next 3 weeks, Daniel's life became consumed by the mystery. He tracked Elena's last movements through public records, discovering that she had been in contact with several Cold War veterans, all of whom had died within a year of speaking to her. He found mentions of the Hollow Ridge, the restricted zone between Austria and the former Yugoslav border, now fenced off by a private defense contractor called Novacore Systems. Though officially they claimed to be researching environmental stability sensors, unofficially no one knew what they were doing. Daniel requested access to the area for academic study. His request was denied. 2 days later, his phone glitched. The same sound from the tape played for a fraction of a second before the call dropped. A faint echo of boots on gravel, then nothing. That night, he began receiving anonymous emails. Each contained a single photograph. Military ruins, barbed wire, and faint human silhouettes behind fog. The final email had no image, only text. She opened the door. You can close it or step through. Daniel didn't sleep. He booked a flight. He arrived in Slovenia, rented a car, and drove north toward the borderlands. The landscape grew emptier with each passing mile. Forests heavy with mist, abandoned checkpoints swallowed by weeds. The GPS lost signal. Only the old map Elena had drawn decades ago guided him now. By dusk, he reached the perimeter fence of the Hollow Ridge. Rusted signs warned of unstable terrain and contaminated soil. But the padlocks were new. The barbed wire gleamed under the weak moonlight. Someone was still maintaining this place. Daniel found a breach in the fence, slipped through, and followed an overgrown path toward the valley. The fog grew thick, swallowing sound. His flashlight flickered as the temperature dropped sharply. Then, out of the mist, he saw it. The ruins of the Alnora church, the same place Elena had described. Half buried in the snow stood the old mirror, cracked and dull, just as Mason Hale had once seen it. The air hummed faintly, a low rhythmic vibration that seemed to sync with his heartbeat. He raised his camera and began recording. Then he heard it, marching, faint, distant, methodical. He turned, expecting wind. But the sound grew louder. Boots on frozen earth. He aimed the flashlight into the fog and froze. Dozens of figures stood motionless in the distance. Soldiers, their uniforms from the 1950s, faces pale, eyes blank like faded photographs brought to life. They didn't move, didn't breathe. Yet every few seconds one would flicker, disappearing for an instant, then returning in a slightly different position, as if reality itself was glitching. Daniel's voice cracked on the recording. "They're still here. Jesus Christ, they're still here." He stumbled backward, tripping over rubble. His flashlight hit the mirror. The cracked glass shimmered, reflecting not his face but another world. Through the broken surface, he saw the same soldiers, alive this time, marching uphill under gunfire, shouting orders. The reflection wasn't a mirror. It was a memory, looping, repeating, eternal. And then he saw her, Elena, standing among them, her press coat torn, camera slung around her neck. She looked older, eyes hollow, but she was there, trapped in the reflection, turning slowly toward him. Her lips moved, soundless at first, then clear. "You shouldn't have come." The mirror shattered. The next moment, Daniel was lying outside the church, dawn breaking through the fog. The valley was empty. His camera still recorded, battery almost dead. He staggered back toward the fence, shaking, heart pounding with every echo of the unseen boots behind him. Back in Vienna, the footage spread through encrypted online forums. People called it fake, another internet hoax. But others, those who had studied Cold War psyops, recognized the coordinates burned into one of the frames. 47.21°, 1491° satellite images of the area soon went offline. Days later, Daniel vanished. His apartment was sealed by authorities citing national security concerns. The institute where he worked disbanded. But one video leaked, 34 seconds long, posted anonymously under the title Echoes of the Forgotten. It showed a foggy valley, a flickering mirror, and hundreds of soldiers standing motionless in the mist. At the end of the clip, a voice whispers, neither Daniel's nor Elena's. Phase 5 initiated. Months passed. Conspiracy channels spun wild theories that Project Eclipse was still active, now digitalized, manipulating memory through information networks. Some said the echo field had expanded beyond the mountains, subtly altering public archives, deleting mentions of the war, the operation, the people. Even the video itself began disappearing. Links corrupted, files missing audio, names replaced by blank metadata. A few viewers who watched the original clip claimed to hear strange sounds afterward, faint echoes of marching at night, whispers repeating their names. One user, a linguist, analyzed the audio frequencies and found embedded patterns matching Cold War radio encryption. He decoded part of it before deleting his account. They remember us because we refuse to remember them. The story should have ended there, another digital ghost, swallowed by time. But in 2025, a Government Transparency Act forced partial release of classified documents from the Project Eclipse archives. Hidden among technical blueprints and psychological studies was a report dated May 12, 1952, authored by a Colonel James Keating. It read, Subject Zone C displays residual echoes. Entities within maintain partial cognition and demonstrate awareness of observation. Recommend permanent containment. Public denial essential for stability. Memory itself may serve as the barrier. Memory as containment. The more people forgot, the safer the world remained. And that's when researchers realized the horrific implication. Remembering them, telling their story, might reactivate what Project Eclipse had created. Each retelling was like a key turning in a lock, buried beneath decades of silence. But what is the moral cost of silence? Can truth be dangerous enough that remembering it risks the fabric of reality itself? Or was that just another lie, one last manipulation to keep the ghosts buried? In the final seconds of Elena's last surviving tape, her voice, faint but calm, says something few ever noticed. They wanted to erase history. But history doesn't vanish. It haunts. And maybe that's what the forgotten soldiers were, not spirits. Not echoes, but fragments of history fighting to exist. Fighting against the world's desire to move on. The valley remains sealed. The fog remains thick. The boots still march. Every war leaves its scars, and some on the earth, some on the soul, and some on the very idea of memory itself. And perhaps, when we close our eyes tonight and hear the distant sound of footsteps, it's not ghosts we're hearing, it's history, refusing to be forgotten. The screen opens to the sound of rain tapping against rusted metal. A single figure walks through a field of broken helmets, half buried beneath the weeds. The camera pans slowly upward, revealing a forgotten military graveyard. No names, no flags. Just numbers burned into corroded steel plates. A deep voice echoes, calm, heavy, reverent. This is where they tried to bury the truth. For decades, the site had been sealed off by local authorities, listed officially as a chemical contamination zone. But when a group of historians reopened the area in 2018, they found more than just the remains of soldiers. They uncovered boxes of undeveloped film reels, field notebooks, and what appeared to be handwritten lists marked with one word: Eclipse. The ink was still legible. The handwriting matched the records of Colonel Jacek Novar, one of the field commanders reported missing in 1971. Inside the notebooks, there were notes describing an unsanctioned withdrawal, not from enemy pressure but from within. Orders had come from the top, instructing entire units to fall back and leave no trace. Soldiers were told to burn documents, destroy insignias, even abandon their wounded. Those who refused were branded traitors. As the rain falls harder, the narration slows, almost breaking. They were told the mission was cancelled. But it wasn't. The fighting didn't stop, it was erased. Eleanor's voice returns, one of the recovered recordings from her final days before disappearing. Her tone is tired but sharp. You can't erase everything. Soil remembers. Rust remembers. The air remembers. Her tape describes the last offensive, an unrecorded siege on a remote mountain pass where both sides had been ordered to hold positions that no longer existed on the map. The fighting continued for 19 days after the ceasefire had been declared. Thousands died believing the war was still raging. Their bodies were never claimed because officially the battle never happened. Back in the modern day, a drone camera glides over those same mountains. The trenches are now trenches of grass and moss. You can still see the outlines of foxholes, but nature has softened the scars. A narrator's voice fades in, older now, reflective, almost whispering. You look at this land, and you think it's quiet. But if you listen long enough, you can still hear them. We cut to an interview, a man in his 70s, weathered face, eyes distant. He introduces himself as Luka Petrov, one of the last surviving members of the 6th Division. He had never spoken publicly, not until the files surfaced. He leans forward, his voice trembling. We weren't fighting for victory anymore. We were fighting for each other. When the orders came to retreat, I thought it was over. But then they told us to erase ourselves. I knew then, Mutt, we weren't meant to come back. He describes the final night. The moon was hidden behind smoke. The air smelled of burnt oil and blood. Men lay in silence, not because they were ordered to, but because hope had died quietly among them. I buried my best friend with my own hands. No flag, no last words, just mud and rain. He looks down, clutching a torn photograph. 2 young men in uniform, smiling, unaware of the future that awaited them. When asked why he kept it all these years, he says softly, because someone had to remember, if I forget. Then they die again. The music deepens and strings, slow and hollow. The camera transitions to the capital city archives, where historians uncover evidence that the Ministry of Defense had indeed authorized the erasure of entire regiments to preserve political stability. The documents, stamped with red ink, carry chilling directives: operations beyond timeline, deny and classify. A journalist explains, over footage of shredded documents and sealed corridors. They didn't lose the war. They deleted it. Elena's tapes, now authenticated by experts, connect the dots, linking Project Eclipse not only to the disappearance of troops, but also to a series of secret deals with foreign governments to shift blame and rewrite outcomes. One memo even instructs officials to transfer fallen personnel to humanitarian records, effectively recategorizing dead soldiers as civilians to obscure military loss figures. The narrative slows again, cutting to an old railway station. It's abandoned now. Ivy covers the broken windows, but under a collapsed roof lies a single trunk, its brass plate inscribed, "For the families." Inside are unopened letters, hundreds of them, letters from soldiers who never made it home, all marked return to sender. One letter is read aloud. The voiceover trembles as it speaks. Dear Mother, they say the war will be over soon. I don't know if I'll come back, but I hope you'll remember me even if the country doesn't. Tell my sister not to cry. Tell her the stars are the same here. Your son, Victor." The sound fades into silence. The only thing audible now is the wind. For the first time, the audience sees Elena's last known location, an empty checkpoint deep in the woods where she vanished. Her car was found, doors open, engine cold. Inside, only one item remained on the passenger seat, a tape labeled, "The Men Who Never Came Home." As the screen darkens, her voice returns one last time, fragmented through radio distortion. "We owe them names. We owe them truth. We owe them the memory they were denied." Then static. The narration concludes softly, almost as a prayer. History doesn't just forget. It's taught to forget. But memory fights back. The music swells, and the image of the nameless graves returns. No flags, no titles, just the endless field of forgotten soldiers under the pale dawn light. The screen opens in near silence. A slow drone shot rises over an endless forest, mist curling through the trees like smoke from an old battlefield. The faint sound of boots echo, not marching but wandering, but searching. A man's voice, soft and trembling, begins to narrate. They thought time would bury it, but the ground never stopped breathing. The camera follows the archaeologists, the same team that unearthed the graves in Part 4. They dig carefully, brushing away layers of wet soil. The spade hits something hard, a rusted dog tag, then another. Within minutes, the ground reveals a pattern, a mass grave perfectly aligned, as if even in death the soldiers stood in formation. The leader of the excavation, Dr. Elena Vos, wipes the mud from one tag. The name is clear, Jacek Novar, the same colonel whose notebooks had described Eclipse. The camera closes in on her face, disbelief, then sorrow. She turns to the team. They found him. He wasn't a ghost. He was just buried where no one dared to look. Her words echo through the empty valley. The narration continues. Slower now, reverent, weighted with finality. They buried him, and hundreds like him, not because they fell in battle, but because they knew too much. The war didn't end with peace. It ended with silence. Inside a dim government archive room, newly declassified files lie spread across a long oak table. The pages are brittle, stained with age. A modern historian reads aloud. Project Eclipse, authorized December 1971. Objective: restructure historical outcome to maintain domestic morale and international leverage. Directive: all remaining field personnel to be reclassified as casualties of training or relocation. He looks up, shaken. It means they erased their own soldiers to protect a lie. Images flicker, the old black and white footage of soldiers smiling for the camera, unaware they would soon vanish from record. Then, color footage, modern, clear, of their descendants, standing at the same coordinates 50 years later, holding candles where the bodies were found. Among them, Luka Petrov, the aging veteran, stands quietly. He wears his uniform again, the same one he hid for decades. His medals are tarnished, but his hands are steady. He steps toward the camera, eyes moist but voice firm. They told us to disappear, but here we are. They said no one would remember. But you're here, they're watching, listening, that's enough. He looks out at the valley, at a sea of crosses now standing where the numbers once lay. They can take our names from paper, but not from the wind. The wind rustles through the forest, as if the world itself is answering him. The screen transitions to Elena Markovich's last recovered recording. The sound is rough, distorted, but clear enough to hear her determination beneath the static. If this is found, tell them the story wasn't about war. It was about what happens when truth is buried. The world forgets, but history doesn't forgive. Moments later, her voice fades, replaced by her breathing steady. Then a faint click of a camera shutter, then silence. She was never seen again. But what she left behind changed everything. After her tapes were leaked to the international press, protests erupted across multiple cities. Governments denied involvement, but the documents spoke louder than the denials. The truth spread faster than anyone expected. Within a year, the Commission of Truth and Memory was formed, a coalition of historians, journalists and veterans, to name every lost soldier. One by one, Identities were restored. Each new name carved onto the memorial stone was a piece of history reclaimed from oblivion. A montage follows, powerful. Wordless families gathering at dawn, a mother placing her son's medal on the new wall of names, children tracing letters they never knew belonged to their grandfathers, an old soldier saluting an empty chair, rain falling gently over the marble. The music swells, orchestral, sorrowful but hopeful. The narrator's voice returns. We are told that wars end, but they never really do. They live in the silence between generations, waiting for someone brave enough to remember. Cut to Luca again. He's seated by a small fire near the graveyard. The flames dance on his face as he reads a letter, the same one we heard in part 4, from Victor to his mother. He folds it gently, then places it into the fire. He finally made it home, Luca whispers. The fire burns brighter for a moment, then dims. Only embers remain. The documentary's final moments are quiet, cinematic, minimal narration, mostly visual poetry. We see the battlefield as it is now, green fields under morning light. Children run through them, playing where the trenches once cut the earth. Birds return to the trees that were once burned black by artillery. A quote fades in on screen, one of Elena's last written notes, found in her apartment months after her disappearance. The forgotten never truly die. They live in every question we dare to ask, and every silence we refuse to keep. The final shot pulls upward, higher and higher, until the landscape becomes endless. Forests, rivers, mountains, all once marked by war, now swallowed by peace. The wind carries distant echoes, the faint rhythm of marching feet, before fading completely into the hum of the earth. Then the narrator delivers the closing words. History remembers the victors, but time remembers the forgotten. Some stories end in silence, but the echo of their courage never fades. If you felt their sacrifice, then don't forget to honor them. With a like, a share, and your respect,